Hi, and welcome to Random Rogers Big Picture for the week of November 18th. During the week, we had an interesting discussion kind of breakout, first in the comments, and then I wrote a little bit about it, about core and explore as a strategy for portfolio construction. Not necessarily a huge fan of it from the standpoint of 80% in something like an SPY or a broader index fund, or 3 or 4 broad-based index funds, and then 20% in some sort of explore. I think that really leads to a portfolio that isn't necessarily diversified from the standpoint of a lot of the bigger indexes are pretty heavy in certain things and light in others, and when you layer them on top, potentially it leads to a couple of unintended lopsided bets. Some may be able to argue otherwise, and certainly there are ways to use these things in such a manner that is mitigated. But either way, so one idea that I had, and this is not a revolutionary idea, but it does build a little bit on what I was talking about on another post during the week, and take this as a way to explore portfolio construction and explore the different types of impact or effects you can create within a portfolio. This is not something that I would imagine any of you are going to do, but at the same time, spending a little bit of time learning about what I'm talking about maybe will allow you to discover something you didn't know about construction and maybe effect and ongoing management. But the idea is to look at the S&P 500, the 10 sectors that make up the S&P 500, and think about, kind of like what I was talking about during the week, figuring out what you think is the best sector ETF to capture the sector, most of the sector, maybe with respect to its weighting, maybe 3/4 or 80% of the sector's weight. I'll just stick with the S&P 500 because it's easy. So for example, the staple sector has a 10.16% weight. Let's round it down to 10 just so the math is easy. Maybe you put 7.5% in what you think is the best staples sector ETF. That leaves you 2.5% to explore something else in the sector, some sort of theme that might interest you. Maybe it's some high-yielding stock, some foreign stock, tobacco, Nilla wafers, what have you, something along those lines, and do that for each of the 10 sectors. And in doing this, you're not really taking crazy single stock risk. You are here and there tweaking, adding value, and giving yourself a chance, maybe, or not, but it depends, but a chance maybe to add a little bit of value than just straight up indexing. Something like the financial sector, it's got a little more than an 18% weight. The financial sector is a great way to explore and add a different country. Most of the emerging markets have, the big bank of a given emerging market country will be one way or another easy to access. So that might be something to explore. And here, a 20% weight of an 18% allocation. So you're talking about, in the neighborhood of somewhere between 3 and 4%. I'm not going to figure the exact thing right here, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Technology is a 16%, just over 16% weight in the S&P, 3 or 4% to some sort of internet name or specialized semiconductor, far from crazy. In the industrial sector, that's an 11.5% weight, something like 2 or 3% again into, maybe something from the water theme. If you look at the components of a couple of the water ETFs, you'll see quite a few industrial names where the story is interesting, the stocks have done well, something to learn about. Maybe that's something for inclusion in a diversified portfolio. So on and on down the list. It gets a little difficult with telecom, utilities, and materials. Each of those, the weightings are 3 point whatever percent. So allocating a quarter to of a 3% weighting, that gets tough for certain accounts. But if you're don't mind paying commission on a 1 or 1.5% allocation, or if that's the fire radio going off, by the way, not an emergency, just adults being children like to play with the radio. Honest to God, that happens. It's a way so you can look at these sectors and kind of build out from there. Energy Maybe something like this. This shirt is not a recommendation, but this shirt I got as free swag from a conference I went to, and as soon as my wife sees it, it'll be the end of the shirt. The sleeves are too short, and that'll be the end of the shirt very quickly as soon as Joellen gets home. But in all seriousness, this is a way to, I think, add the Explore without, there are a lot of comments about it being a free ticket to gamble. And the way I have in mind, what I have in mind here is absolutely not a roll of the dice. It's a way to add some individual stocks, some narrow effects. If you manage your portfolio and just use various types of funds, I think you're overlooking a very important tool. Individual stocks, obviously are narrower than any other type of fund you can find. It's a way to add yield. Depending on how you use it, it's a way to reduce volatility. There's all sorts of benefits that can come from blending in different things together. At least I'm convinced that that is the case. And so to the extent that you learn about this, it might be a way to, I think I may have said this already, hone your skills about how to analyze, study, and ultimately select a couple of individual stocks for your portfolio. Something like 5 or 6 or 7 stocks, and really, if you've got 10 sectors, you throw out the 3 that have just a 3% weighting, you're really talking about maybe adding 7 individual stocks, all somewhere with maybe a 2 to a 4% weighting in the portfolio. It's really not a reckless, crazy thing, especially if you keep an eye toward proportion. Energy, for example, 11%. If you somehow end up with 30% in energy, regardless of how you get there, that's clearly out of proportion. If you end up with 2% in energy, that also clearly out of proportion. Both pretty big bets and, really the complete opposite of what I'm talking about. All right, well, that's about it. Hopefully this whips up some discussions. Maybe it gets you to do a little research, explore some interesting themes like maybe wind power, maybe solar, maybe cleaning the air, maybe one of the manure companies. That's talking about materials, but you get the idea. There's all sorts of interesting themes available that when you get too broad, you just can't capture in a portfolio. Have a great weekend.